Snow was falling in heavy sheets across the frozen wetlands of the Northreach tundra, each flake adding another dangerous layer to a landscape that stretched endlessly in every direction. The ice under their boots snapped with every cautious step, hinting at the dark water below waiting to claim anyone careless enough to slip through. Sergeant Mira Voss steadied herself by pressing a gloved palm against a rough, frost-covered pine trunk as another brutal gust of Arctic wind tore through the trees. Echo Squad had been trudging through this miserable terrain for 6 exhausting hours, and the temperature had plummeted another 10 degrees since they'd crossed the river at dawn. Mira exhaled, watching her breath turn instantly into icy crystals on her scarf while the rest of the 8-man squad forced their way through knee-deep snow, barely visible as faint thermal outlines through the curtain of falling ice. "Command must be out of their minds sending us through this," muttered Corporal Logan Avery, the communications tech, his voice half swallowed by the wind, but Mira still caught the fatigue in it. "Weather's just getting nastier." Captain Rowan Blake raised a fist, the silent order to stop, and everyone froze, weapons up, eyes sweeping the endless white void. Mira dropped to one knee, her custom rifle already snug against her shoulder, scope scanning the tree line with practiced precision. Something felt wrong, Rowan whispered through the radio, too quiet, and she understood immediately. Even in winter, a marsh this big should have some noise, shifting ice, a bird call, anything, but this silence felt intentional, like the entire world was holding its breath. She'd earned her place in Echo Squad 3 years earlier after nailing a moving target at 1,800 meters during a sandstorm. They'd said it couldn't be done, she'd called it just another Tuesday, but behind that legend were whispers that she was too cold, too machine-like, too fearless to trust. They never realized she felt everything, she'd just learned never to show it. 2 years back she'd rushed a shot, misread the wind, exposing her spotter Eric Tanaka. The enemy triangulated the muzzle flash and Eric had shoved her out of the kill zone, taking 3 rounds meant for her. Since that day she'd worked alone, no spotter, no partner, just her rifle, and the math of long-range death. "Set camp," Rowan ordered, pointing toward a cluster of pines offering the bare minimum of shelter. "We move at 0400. Stay sharp." The squad split up smoothly, each person knowing their job. Mira picked a position on the outer perimeter about 40 meters out, where she could watch every approach. She brushed snow from beneath a drooping pine branch, forming a shallow hide that would mask her thermal signature while giving her clean sight lines. As night closed in, she went through her usual ritual, checking every part of her rifle, fingertips gliding along the barrel, adjusting the scope one more time, the comfort of routine preparing her for whatever the tundra was planning next. Her custom rifle, chambered in .338 Loyola Magnum, was built for precision at distances most snipers only theorized about. Near 2,200 hours, Mira Voss spotted something, a quick glint, too sharp to be moonlight on ice, about 800 meters to the northeast. She logged it in her mind but didn't radio it in yet, could have been a trick of the tundra, or maybe not. An hour later, faint sounds cut through the wind, a soft metallic scrape like gear brushing metal, followed by slow, deliberate footsteps, nothing like the familiar cadence of her own squad. Mira tapped her radio twice, silent alert. Across camp, Captain Rowan Blake lifted his head, instantly locked on her position. She signaled toward the northeast, 8 fingers, then a circling motion. "Surrounded." Rowan reacted calmly, waking the squad without a sound, nudging them into defensive positions while the storm swallowed their movements. But Mira already knew they'd been outplayed. The older tracks scattered around camp told the story. Whoever shadowed them had been preparing this for days, waiting for dawn, waiting for the kill. The ambush hit at 5:47, that haunting sliver before sunrise when everything is shadow and the eye struggles to decide what's real. Mira had been awake, scope sweeping the tree line through her thermals. A small drone buzzed into view, silent, hovering just above frostbitten grass 300 meters out. Civilian model, heavily modified. Their enemies weren't amateurs, they were funded and highly trained. She reached for her radio, but the marsh erupted first. Smoke grenades blasted from 3 sides, flooding the air with thick haze that blinded every thermal optic they had. Gunfire followed, disciplined, professional volleys, not the wild panic of rebels. Contact front. Avery yelled, barely audible over explosions. Mira rolled aside as bullets shredded the pine branches above her, stinging her face with wood splinters and frozen needles. Hugging the ground, she crawled toward a fallen log, her rifle tight to her chest while her mind automatically calculated ranges and angles amid the chaos. Through shifting pockets in the smoke she spotted at least 20 attackers working in synchronized teams, moving like soldiers who'd practiced this 100 times, no badges, top-tier night vision, armored vests, suppressed weapons. Echo Squad fought back, but they'd been funneled perfectly into a killing field. Rowan's voice cut through the comms, trying to orchestrate a retreat uphill, but the smoke suffocated visibility and the enemy pressed too close. Mira braced behind the log, lined up her scope on a squad leader signaling hand movements to his men, let out a controlled breath, and squeezed. The rifle kicked into her shoulder, the man dropped. But for every target she removed, more emerged, the attackers using tactics she recognized as Russian Special Forces doctrine adapted for asymmetric warfare. Then a grenade landed close, too close, detonating with a blast that slammed her into the ground. Her ears screamed with sharp ringing, her sight flickered, and the metallic taste of blood told her she'd bitten her tongue. Disoriented, she heard Avery's panicked voice burst over comms, "They're everywhere, we can't," before his transmission cut to static. Mira blinked, trying to clear the blood running from her brow, and raised her rifle again. What she saw through that scope made her gut twist with cold dread. As the smoke thinned, Echo Squad's defenses collapsed. They weren't being executed, they were being taken. Whoever these soldiers were, they wanted captives alive. Captain Rowan Blake was forced onto his knees, wrists cinched tight with zip ties. Logan Avery lay unconscious, already dragged toward a gathering point. One by one the others, Sergio Diaz, Adam Royce, Tyler Brooks, Connor Webb, Gene Seo, were slammed into the snow, restrained with chilling efficiency. Mira Voss tried to shift, to intervene, to take even one shot, when suddenly the ice beneath her fractured with a sharp crystalline scream. Heat from her body and the pressure of nearby explosions had weakened it. In an instant, she plunged into the freezing black below, cold flooding her lungs like a shock grenade detonating inside her chest. The marsh was only chest deep, but the mud clawed at her legs like a living trap. She fought her way up, rifle miraculously still in her grip, teeth chattering as she surfaced beneath a tangle of fallen branches that shielded her from sight. Above her, boots scraped over the ice. Voices spoke in accented English, 8 prisoners secured. Moving to extraction point. Confirmed. Grid Aurelia 7. Transport in 20. Then silence crept back in, leaving only the howl of wind and Myra's panicked breathing. She was the last one free. Alone, soaked, no radio, no backup, and the cold already stalking her like a patient killer. Avery's comms gear was gone, and with it, any hope of an immediate rescue. Mira dragged herself from the water, moving with robotic precision as numbness chewed through her muscles. She had maybe an hour before hypothermia finished what the enemy couldn't. But she didn't hesitate. Her squad had vanished into the dawn, and she was the only chance they had left. Her fingers were blue and barely responsive as she tore off her drenched layer, fumbling through her pack until she finally unrolled an emergency thermal blanket. Hypothermia wasn't just freezing, it was a predator waiting for weakness. She crawled beneath a massive pine whose branches formed a natural shelter, the ground beneath surprisingly dry thanks to the thick bed of needles. Wrapping the metallic sheet around her, she forced herself to breathe slow and deep until the violent shivering eased to something manageable. The tundra around her was breathtaking and deadly in equal measure, each crack of distant ice sounded like a gunshot, each gust of wind like a warning. But the most terrifying silence was inside her headset, no voices of teammates, no Blake barking orders, just the unrelenting reminder that 8 soldiers were captured because she missed the signs. The memory of Eric Tanaka shoved through her mind, the way he'd looked at her before taking bullets meant for her. One mistake then. Another now. She shut that thought down. Emotion later. Action now. Mira pulled out her personal thermal monocular, top grade, bought with her own money, still functioning despite its icy bath, and swept the marsh, dividing it into sectors like she'd been trained. There, 2 kilometers northeast, multiple heat signatures moving as a tight tactical column. Her squad inside that formation, no doubt. They were heading deeper into hostile territory, toward whatever hidden stronghold these ghosts came from. She checked her rifle, still operational. Military rifles were born to survive conditions worse than this, but she'd need to strip and dry it soon to trust a long-distance shot. And time was the one thing she didn't have. Because once those soldiers reached their base, interrogation would begin. And not the gentle kind. Every minute her squad stayed in enemy hands shaved away at their odds of making it out alive. Mira Voss weighed the options with cold clarity. She could try to fall back to friendly lines, file a report, wait for command to spin up a rescue op that might take days, and by then Echo Squad would either be dead or vanished into some black site no one could trace. Or she could do the thing she'd been trained for, hunt. The marsh was a death trap, but it was also cover. No one in their right mind would expect a lone sniper to chase them through this kind of frozen nightmare. They'd assumed their only problem was moving prisoners fast and getting them secured before anyone realized Echo Squad had missed check-in. Mira gave herself 10 minutes, no more, to dry her rifle and reset. Muscle memory took over as she stripped the weapon, cleared every part, then snapped it back together with hands that finally stopped shaking. She swapped into her one remaining set of dry base layers, trading some warmth for the freedom to move. Quick ammo check, 32 rounds of 338 Lapua Magnum against 20+ hostile soldiers. The numbers were ugly. But numbers had never stopped her before. She started tracking, gliding through the tundra with the patience of someone who understood that rushing without stealth was just suicide in fast forward. The enemy had left a clear trail, boot prints punched into snow, shattered ice sheets, snapped branches. They were pushing hard, favoring speed over stealth, absolutely sure no one would be crazy enough to follow them through this frozen hell. They were wrong. After 90 minutes of methodical pursuit, Mira spotted a rocky rise jutting 50 meters above the marsh floor. It was bare, windswept, and easily the dumbest place any sane sniper would choose to set up. The wind there whipped around in wild, swirling gusts that couldn't be predicted. But it was also the only point within 3 kilometers that gave her a clean view of where they were taking her squad. She cranked her scope to maximum and finally saw it, a cleared patch of land beside an old ranger station, now turned into a makeshift holding site. Her people were stuffed into what looked like a reinforced storage building. Guards paced the perimeter. Others clustered near vehicles. Mira pulled out her rangefinder. Readout, 2,897 meters, almost 3 kilometers. She'd nailed shots at 2,200 meters before. The longest confirmed kill on record sat just beyond 3,500 meters, taken by a Canadian special operator with ideal conditions and a full spotting team. Mira had none of that. Just brutal crosswinds, falling snow, sub-zero air messing with her ballistics, and the ugly certainty that her squad would die if she didn't take the shot. She started running the math. The path the enemy cut through the marsh read like a book to someone who knew how to interpret it. Moving parallel to their trail, staying in cover, Mira studied every small detail with the same clinical focus that had made her one of the Army's top snipers. Professional unit, no doubt. Their spacing was textbook, 5 meters between bodies, staggered lines so one hit wouldn't take out several. On thinner ice they'd gone single file, each boot landing exactly in the print ahead to spread the weight. Still, they weren't perfect. The kind of flaws no one noticed unless someone was actively hunting you. One trooper had a busted boot, left heel cracked, leaving a distinctive mark in the snow. Another had a slight limp, pushing harder with his right leg and stamping deeper prints on that side. Those quirks told Mira she was on the right unit, not just chasing random tracks in the tundra. She reached a small stand of trees where they'd paused to regroup, prints overlapped, and cigarette butts lay half buried in the snow. Confident enough to smoke in the open, that meant they believed they owned this territory. The tracks veered steadily northeast toward higher, firmer ground where marsh faded into dense pine forest. Mira followed like a patient predator, placing each step with care, using every fold of terrain and line of shadow to keep herself invisible. Years of discipline had molded Mira Voss into someone who could vanish into the landscape, not through fancy tech, but by understanding how light, shadow, and the human eye played tricks on each other. As she pushed forward, her mind constantly scanned for firing positions. Angles, cover, distance, wind shear, escape routes, every bit of ground was evaluated like a puzzle piece. Most higher ridges sat too close to the enemy's movement path. Firing from one of those would pinpoint her instantly and leave no hope of retreat. She needed distance, extreme distance. The kind where the sound of her shot wouldn't reach the target until seconds after impact, buying her crucial time to disappear. That's when she saw it. A jagged slab of rock jutting from the marsh like a giant's broken tooth. Exposed, lonely, impossible to defend, exactly the kind of place no sane sniper would choose. Which made it perfect. Mira climbed with deliberate care, testing each grip, fully aware that one slip or twisted ankle here wasn't an injury, it was a death sentence. The wind screamed louder the higher she went, whistling between the stones like distant voices. At the crest, she found a flat enough ledge to lie prone with her rifle. From there, the entire valley spread beneath her like a map, every vehicle, every guard, every building around the repurposed ranger station etched sharply through her scope. She checked the range again, 2,900 meters. 1.8 miles. At that distance, a bullet traveled nearly 4 seconds before it hit. Gravity would drag it almost 30 meters from the barrel's line. A mere 5-mile crosswind could shove it over a meter sideways, and the winds up here were far worse, snapping between 15 and 30 with no pattern. Military doctrine would call the shot insane, unachievable. Mira had long since learned that impossible usually meant no one's done it yet. She started building the perfect nest. Her gloves came off, the cold biting instantly at her fingers, but she needed to feel every grain of rock beneath the rifle, needed direct contact with the platform to eliminate even microscopic shifts. At nearly 3 kilometers, the smallest error became catastrophic. She placed stones in an exact pattern to cradle the rifle, locking out recoil drift. The barrel needed to be perfectly level, one fraction of cant and the round would be sailing into open air. Then came the biggest enemy, wind. At close ranges you compensated. At this range, wind owned the bullet. It changed with altitude, terrain, temperature, turning invisible, unpredictable. Mira pulled out her battered notebook and began noting the air currents like a meteorologist with a rifle. She watched snowflakes spin, studied how treetops swayed differently from the brush below, reading the whole valley like a breathing organism. Her old Marine instructor had once taught her a trick, fieldcraft older than electronic wind meters. She plucked a few strands of her own hair, feeling the direction and force of the breeze in each filament. She tied them to pebbles and placed them around her hide, tiny natural sensors that reacted instantly to even the slightest shift in wind. When her setup was complete, she slowed her breathing until her pulse stopped fluttering from the climb. Heartbeats dropped, 50, 45, sounds around her melting into a muted hush. Vision tightened to a tunnel of laser focus. This was the zone, what she called the stillness, where instinct, math, and muscle memory fused into one machine made for a single purpose, the perfect shot. Her pulse finally steadied at 44 beats per minute. Perfect. Through the scope, Mira Voss studied the compound, guards rotated on a predictable 15-minute cycle, textbook protocol. Her squad was crammed into the main structure, she could see glimpses of them whenever the door swung open. 8 heads. Everyone still alive. But the shot she needed wasn't a simple one and done. It required a sequence, a clean dismantling of the threat chain. First target had to be the one holding command, the person whose decision could get Echo Squad executed before help ever arrived. Faces were small smudges at nearly 3 kilometers, but posture told the truth. One man at the center barked silent orders with confident gestures, others deferred to him without question. That was her mark. If he fell, the chaos could buy her team precious seconds. But as she steadied her breath, an unwelcome memory cut through her focus: Eric Tanaka's calm voice, the way he used to guide her shots: wind left to right, compensate 8 clicks, target moving, lead a meter. She'd once had someone to share the risk, someone to catch variables she might miss. Now, she was alone. She flipped open her ballistic notebook and ran the numbers. Bullet drop from this distance, roughly 29.7 meters. Coriolis effect: the Earth's rotation would nudge the round 8 centimeters to the right at this latitude. Temperature -15 Celsius, reduced muzzle velocity by about 20 feet per second. Every factor checked twice, then dialed carefully into the scope. But the wind, always the wind, remained the unpredictable variable. It would shift during the bullet's 4-second flight. She'd have to trust instinct where math surrendered. Through the glass, something changed. Guards were moving her squad outside, forming a line against a wall. Not a transfer. An execution. Mira felt her heart spike, threatening to tear apart the calm she'd built atom by atom. She forced one deep breath, smothering panic. Losing control now meant failure. And failure meant 8 dead. She slid fully into firing position, cheek molded to the stock, eye perfectly centered behind the scope. Finger resting on the trigger like a whisper. Her world collapsed into a narrow tunnel, just her, the rifle, and the man whose death could rewrite the next 10 seconds. And then, impossibly, the wind died. Total stillness. The air froze mid-breath, snowflakes hanging weightless. These moments didn't happen often, but Mira had learned to recognize the universe giving her a sliver of a chance. 4 seconds. Maybe 5. Through maximum magnification, the commander became crystal clear, arms sweeping as he barked more orders, the prisoners bracing beneath his gaze. She'd seen that posture before, the body language of execution. Her crosshairs settled dead center on his torso. A headshot was fantasy at this distance. Center mass gave her the only sliver of margin she had. Every calculation had been made. Everything now pivoted on one thing: intuition. Mira breathed out, emptying her lungs until she reached that perfect 0 point between inhales, stillness incarnate. One more heartbeat, slow and heavy, and she squeezed. The rifle thundered, recoil digging into her shoulder as the blast echoed back through the rocks. She stayed locked on target, tracking the round's invisible flight. 1 second, bullet climbing in its arc. 2 seconds, cresting at its peak. 3 seconds, racing downward, slashing through frigid air. 4 seconds, impact. The commander crumpled instantly, collapsing like strings had been cut. For a heartbeat, the compound didn't react. Confusion swallowed them, no one yet understood what had happened. The rifle's report would take another 3 seconds to reach them, and even then, the icy landscape would bounce the sound in every direction until it became meaningless. The sound of the shot scattered across the frozen wetlands, ricocheting off the marsh in every direction. A nearby guard stared down at the fallen commander, bewildered. Another whipped around, searching blindly for a shooter who existed only as a distant phantom. Then the delayed crack of the rifle finally arrived, an echo with no clear origin. Chaos answered immediately. Mira Voss had already worked the bolt, sliding a fresh round home. She'd planned for these precious seconds where confusion reigned. Her next target, the guard with his weapon aimed squarely at Captain Rowan Blake. She caught him through her crosshairs just as he turned, trying to make sense of the situation. Mira fired. 4 seconds of suspense. Another flawless calculation. Another body dropping. The compound broke into full panic. Guards scattered for cover while others tried to drag the prisoners back inside. But 3 members of Echo Squad, Sergio Diaz, Adam Royce, and Tyler Brooks, were already fighting back, grabbing weapons from distracted captors and sprinting toward freedom. Mira swung her scope to the next threat, an enemy soldier crouched behind a barrel, lining up a shot at the escapees. She led her aim just slightly, squeezed, miss. The wind had shifted, just enough to betray her. She chambered again. No hesitation. Adjusted. Fired. The soldier collapsed before he could pull the trigger. 4 shots fired. 3 hits at nearly 3 kilometers. Numbers that seemed impossible unless you understood that impossible was just something Mira hadn't done yet. But now the enemy was learning. They hauled up a heavy machine gun and pointed it toward the ridge. They couldn't see her, she was too far, too well hidden, but they could lay down suppressive fire and pray for luck. A burst of rounds slammed into boulders 50 meters from her perch, sharp cracks warning her that luck sometimes hit its mark. Mira took one final shot, at a fuel truck she'd tagged earlier as a contingency. The 338 round tore through the tank's skin, and the vehicle erupted in a roaring fireball, sending guards flying and smothering the area with thick smoke. Under cover of the blast, Echo Squad vanished into the marsh, Blake herding them toward the maze of frozen waterways where no tracker could easily follow. Mira had done her part. The next part, survive. She spotted the enemy forming a pursuit element, arming up, bundling into heavy gear. They knew roughly where the shots originated, and whoever led them was furious. Mira collapsed her shooting nest in seconds. That rocky outcrop that served her so well was now a beacon pointing right at her. 10 minutes before hostile boots reached her position, if she was lucky. Time to move. She scrambled down the rocks carefully, each foothold deliberate. One fall in this cold meant shattered bones, and shattered bones meant death. She dropped nearly 30 meters before the first incoming round slammed into the stone just above. Enemy thermals had caught her heat signature. Their accuracy was still off, 800 meters and closing fast, but pressure was building. Mira leapt the final 3 meters into deep snow. The soft landing slowed her, but she was still mobile. Ahead, the marsh was a labyrinth of fragile ice crusts and deep sinkholes. The same terrain hampering her would slow her hunters, if she used it right. She veered sharply, avoiding the predictable escape line, cutting instead toward a stretch of broken ice and standing water, dangerous ground for everyone, which meant advantage for her. She paused at the edge, analyzing the surface. Darker patches signaled thin crust or exposed water, brighter snow meant more solid footing. With cautious steps, she distributed her weight, moving like a ghost across the fragile sheet. Behind her, shouts. The pursuit team had reached the edge, debating their next move, split-second decisions in a place that punished mistakes without mercy. One of the soldiers pushed forward too aggressively. Mira Voss heard the ice snap, then the splash, then frantic swearing as he plunged into freezing water while his teammates scrambled to haul him out. One down by his own impatience. The rest slowed immediately, caution replacing confidence. Good. Mira reached solid ground on the far side and slipped behind a fallen log, setting up her rifle to watch the ice field like a trap she'd laid herself. Every second she bought here was another second Echo Squad pulled farther ahead. Through the scope, she watched 4 remaining pursuers creeping across the ice, weapons raised, sharp and disciplined, dangerous men who knew what they were doing. She lined up her crosshairs not on the point man himself, but a patch of ice right beneath his next step. The 338 round blasted a hole straight through, shards spraying upward as he recoiled, weight shifting just wrong, the ice shattered and he dropped with a howl into the black water. The other 3 froze. Forward meant drowning, backward meant turning their backs on the sniper who could drop them before they blinked. Mira fired again, not at bodies but the ice near a second soldier. Cracks spiderwebbed beneath him and fear overpowered his training. He stumbled backward, desperate to avoid the fate of his comrades. Now survival outweighed pursuit. They dragged the freezing men out while staring anxiously at the ice, and for the first time since the ambush, Mira had breathing room. But she knew it wouldn't last. They'd regroup. Reinforce. Come harder. She needed to catch her squad before round 2 began. Pulling out her compass, she oriented northeast, deeper into the tundra toward the rolling hills she'd seen Echo Squad heading for, terrain that offered concealment and defensible ground. Snow thickened into heavy flakes that stole distance from the eyes but graciously buried her tracks. She moved fast and smart, sticking to animal paths and dips in the land to hide her heat signature from anyone scanning above. 40 minutes of brutal pace later, there, fresh boot prints, 8 sets, spaced tactically. They were alive. They were organized. They were giving her a trail. She followed quickening footsteps fueled by purpose, mentally shifting into the next phase. The hunters chasing Echo Squad weren't quitting, she'd humiliated them, cost them men, and stolen their prize. They'd throw everything at reclaiming that victory. Mira did a quick ammo count. 19 rounds left against at least 15 hostile operators. Terrible odds. Familiar odds. She found Echo Squad nestled in a natural depression surrounded by dense pines, excellent fields of fire, concealment from above, and paths to escape if needed. Before stepping into their defense line, she used the daily password, no one wanted itchy fingers right now. Captain Rowan Blake turned, relief washing across his face as if a ghost had stepped out of the snow. Sergeant Voss, he breathed, gripping her shoulder. That was one hell of a rescue. The squad looked worn and battered, Sergio Diaz leaning heavily on Logan Avery with a badly twisted ankle, Adam Royce clutching a bleeding shoulder, but they were alive. Thanks to her. The injuries weren't fatal, but every movement hurt, and the cold was stripping strength from all of them. Mira Voss didn't waste time on comfort. We move now, she ordered. They're regrouping. We've got maybe 30 minutes before they're on top of us. Logan Avery struggled to support Sergio Diaz. We can't move fast with him, and Adam isn't great either. Captain Rowan Blake didn't hesitate. Then we bleed them for every meter they take. Voss, you're our edge here. What do you need? Time, Mira replied. I'll set delays. Pick off their point men. If I slow them enough, we reach extraction. Extraction, 6 kilometers north, just a clearing where a helicopter might land, if they could reach someone, if weather didn't collapse again. Too many ifs. They pushed forward with Mira scouting well ahead. Every few hundred meters, she found a vantage, glassed the back trail, waited for movement, and when she saw silhouettes creeping too close, she fired. The enemy had learned respect now. They advanced spread wide, reading terrain properly, no longer arrogant. At 600 meters she dropped their lead scout. They hit the ground, scanning for her. By the time they aimed weapons her way, she'd already slid back into the trees, repositioning 500 meters further on. Another round. This time, her bullet smashed through a soldier's radio instead of his chest, silent warfare. Confusion spread in their ranks. Fear did more than bullets could. And so the dance continued for 2 grueling hours. Mira delayed. Echo Squad survived. But the marsh fought them too. Thin ice slowed them to a crawl, each step tested before committing weight. Ice shattered beneath Tyler Brooks, plunging him chest-deep into the freezing water. Panic seized him, frantic thrashing pulling him deeper. Mira hit the ground, spreading her weight, extending her rifle stock toward him. Freeze, look at me, she commanded. His terrified gaze locked on hers. Breathe. Slow. Arms wide, you're not sinking. Feet, find the bottom. 4 feet. Solid. She watched understanding return to his eyes as his boots found the mud below. Good. Now push with your legs. Slow. You're getting out. 2 agonizing minutes later, he crawled free, trembling uncontrollably but alive. They wrapped him in a thermal blanket and forced him forward, because stopping meant death. Twilight finally found them atop a small hill ringed with rock outcrops, good sight lines, layered cover, and multiple exit routes. A place to stand. Call extraction, Blake ordered as Logan pulled a backup radio from his pack. Static. More static. Storm interference, Logan muttered. Or they're jamming us. Blake's jaw tensed. Then we hold till dawn. Rotate watch. Voss, you're overwatch. If you see movement, engage. When night slammed into the tundra, temperatures plunged below -20. Mira nestled into the rocks, her rifle resting steady. This was going to be the longest night of her career, and the enemy wasn't done yet. They struck at 0200, the hour when exhaustion erases instinct. Mira spotted them first, heat signatures weaving between trees, coordinated, at least a dozen. Contact, she whispered into comms. Multiple hostiles, 300 meters and closing. Echo Squad snapped awake, forming a defensive ring, sectors overlapping. Textbook, but 8 against 12 plus still wasn't math she liked. Earlier, she'd laced the approaches with crude alarms, tin cans on trip wires, pressure triggers from sticks and cord. Not deadly, just loud. The first can rattled at 280 meters. Myra's scope flicked to the disturbance, one breath, shot. A hostile down, vanishing into the snow. The rest dropped instantly, not panicking, not running. These were motivated professionals, still stinging from humiliation and determined to take revenge. Their advance resumed, slow and controlled, covering each other with bursts of automatic fire that tore neon tracers through the falling snow. The firefight exploded into the dark like lightning waking a dead world. Tracers sliced through the snowfall like glowing predators hunting in the dark. Every time Mira Voss fired, a deeper, heavier punch of return fire slammed into the rock shielding her. She cycled her rifle with practiced ease, picking targets with icy precision, no wasted ammo, no unnecessary risks. At 200 to 400 meters, she was an apex predator, and the enemy understood that the moment their numbers began to thin. Their fire shifted heavily toward her position, a desperate effort to keep her pinned while their assault teams pushed forward. But Mira had long ago learned how to survive under a hail of bullets. You didn't ignore the incoming fire, that was suicide. You simply learned to distinguish which rounds mattered and which were just noise meant to scare you. Most were noise. 3 more silhouettes fell to her shots, and suddenly the enemy's advance faltered. They'd planned a quick, overwhelming takedown of a battered squad defending a patch of frozen ground. Instead, they crashed headfirst into a sniper who seemed untouchable in the dark. Whoever took command after she dropped the first leader made a new call. Mira saw the shift instantly, forces pulling back, regrouping. Then she recognized the danger, they were deploying a sniper of their own. The first round passed her head close enough for her to hear the bullet tear the air, a whip crack of death missing by inches. Professional. Someone trained for exactly this duel. She rolled left, vanishing behind a boulder. Another shot hit precisely where her skull had been a heartbeat earlier, spraying ice and stone chips. This wasn't general combat anymore. This was hunter versus hunter, sniper versus sniper, the most intimate and lethal contest on the battlefield. Mira slowed her breathing, forced her thoughts to settle. Her opponent had thermal optics too, he'd seen her muzzle flash and tracked her outline. He expected her to pop up at a new angle. So she didn't. She stayed still. A statue among frozen stones. Behind her, Echo Squad laid down suppressive bursts to keep the infantry at bay. Ammo was running thin. The enemy clearly had more to burn. 5 tense minutes crawled by before she spotted the faintest thermal halo, 400 meters out, above ground level. The glint of a scope shifting. Her crosshairs slid onto that tiny flicker of heat, and she waited. Snipers always moved again, they couldn't help it. There, another shift. Mira fired. The thermal glow crumpled and disappeared. Silence followed. The effect was immediate, panic rippled through the attackers. Without their precision shooter, they lost the one tool that could counter Mira. Their fire grew sloppy, their push wavered. Captain Rowan Blake seized the opening. Suppressive fire, all sectors. Drive them back. Echo Squad unleashed everything left in their rifles. Rational soldiers retreat when they realize the math is against them, and these soldiers were rational. They dragged their wounded into the darkness, retreating from a fight that had cost them dearly. Mira didn't celebrate. This was no victory, only a temporary breath before the storm reset. At dawn, the enemy would either swarm them with overwhelming numbers, or call in steel rain. They needed extraction, and fast. As if answering her thoughts, Logan's voice cut through the comms, "I've got signal, weak, but signal." Blake was already shouting coordinates and emergency codes into the radio. Silence. Agonizing silence. Then Logan breathed out, "They copy. Birds en route. 45 minutes. 45 minutes. An eternity in combat terms. The enemy would hear those rotors long before the helicopters touched down, and they'd throw everything left to stop that rescue. "Check ammo," Blake ordered. "Next round is gonna hurt." Mira inspected her magazine, 6 rounds left. 6 bullets between her squad and whatever horror the enemy planned next. She had made the impossible happen many times tonight. She prayed she had 6 more miracles left. The helicopters came in low beneath the trees, rotor wash blasting snow into swirling white chaos. The rotors churned the air into a storm of swirling snow and ice fragments as 2 armed Blackhawks skimmed into the clearing, door guns already hunting targets. Just as Mira Voss expected, the enemy launched one final desperate charge from the tree line, last chance to stop extraction before the sky stole their victory. But now the attackers stood outlined against the pale morning, and Echo Squad fought like people who could finally see hope in the distance. Mira used her final 6 rifle rounds with clinical calm, 6 pulls of the trigger, 6 bodies dropping in rhythm that would have earned quiet envy from any sniper instructor. When the magazine clicked empty, she swapped to her sidearm mid-breath, firing controlled shots to keep the enemy's heads down while the helicopters flared for landing. "Move! Move!" Captain Rowan Blake bellowed, ushering soldiers to the birds as machine gunners unleashed punishing suppressive fire, chewing the ground where enemy boots once ran. Wounded teammates were hauled aboard, Sergio Diaz and Adam Royce practically lifted into safety. Tyler Brooks, still wrapped in his emergency blanket, staggered with help toward the ramp. Blake stayed outside, counting his people, refusing to leave until the last one was inside. Mira sprinted, lungs stinging, legs screaming, pistol barking in her hand. She dove into the Blackhawk just as it launched upward, lifting them out of hell. The tundra shrank beneath them, a frozen graveyard scarred with smoke and craters. She spotted enemy silhouettes gathering below, staring upward in fury and disbelief as salvation escaped their grasp. Inside the aircraft, Echo Squad checked injuries, confirmed headcounts, wrapped themselves in blankets, and let the reality of survival sink in. Someone shoved a water bottle into Myra's hand, another laid a warm blanket over her shoulders. Blake slid onto the bench beside her, leaning close through the roar. "That shot, nearly 3 kilometers. I didn't think anyone could hit that." "I couldn't," Mira said honestly. "Everything was wrong. Wind. Temperature. Ballistics, odds were terrible." "And yet you did," Blake replied, stunned. 3 times. That's history book stuff." Mira didn't answer. Her eyes drifted back toward the marsh, thinking of Eric Tanaka, thinking of the shots she hadn't made once upon a time, and the 8 lives that still existed because tonight she did. Logan Avery leaned over with a tired grin. "Command's already got a nickname floating around networks," he said. "Silent Frost. The sniper who haunts the snow." Mira snorted lightly. "That's ridiculous." "Hey," Logan smirked, "as far as military call signs go. Could be a hell of a lot worse." The helicopter banked north, away from the battlefield, away from the frozen nightmare that tried to bury them, and toward the promise of dawn. As the helicopter pushed them toward safety, toward heat, real food, and medics who could actually help, Mira Voss felt something uncoil inside her. For so long she had carried the weight of Eric Tanaka's death, a crushing guilt that convinced her she was better off alone, that she was a liability to anyone who trusted her. But now, that weight eased. She hadn't been able to save Eric, but she had saved Echo Squad. Redemption, she realized, didn't always mean fixing the past. Sometimes it meant standing tall when the moment came, choosing to act when everything seemed lost. The first rays of sun split the clouds ahead, splashing the endless snowfields with gold and rose, beautiful and deadly, like every inch of this tundra that had tried to claim them. Captain Rowan Blake rested a hand on her shoulder, nodding toward the others. "Do you understand what you did back there?" he said, voice raised over the rotors. "You gave us something no one else could have. Hope. When we thought we were done, you proved we weren't." Mira looked at the faces around her, Sergio Diaz, Adam Royce, Tyler Brooks, Connor Webb, Gene Seo, Logan Avery, Rowan Blake. 8 soldiers who'd believed in her. 8 survivors alive because she refused to accept that impossible meant stop trying. "Just did my job, sir," she said quietly. Blake shook his head. "No. You did better than your job. You pulled off the impossible." The Black Hawk banked toward the rising sun, away from the silent marshlands and the haunted forest where death had stalked them every step. The battleground faded under blankets of white behind them. Ahead waited life. And somewhere in between, the woman they once called too cold, too detached, had become the silent frost, the sniper who made the shot that should never have existed. The one who stood alone against a storm and refused to let her squad die. The one who turned 4 seconds of stillness into salvation. 1 bullet for hope. 1 bullet for survival. 1 bullet for redemption. Soon, the snow would bury every trace of the fight, the shell casings, the footprints, the blood. But the story would live on. It would travel through bases and briefing rooms, whispered by instructors to recruits who swore some shots were impossible. The tale of the silent frost sniper. The legend of Mira Voss, who proved that impossible simply meant no one had done it, until she did.